Today's episode of The Meatball Composer is about Star Wars, and specifically Episode 9, and where that leaves the series as a whole. I'm going to be talking to two friends of mine that I met while taking some philosophy and apologetics classes over the last several years, Nathan Montgomery and Brandon Tejedor. And I've noticed that all three of us have had interesting things to say about Star Wars on social media posts and quick discussions here and there. So I wanted to get their take on this last movie because it's been controversial in terms of quality and where it leaves the saga and how it addresses the previous films. And for me personally, that has always found Star Wars uh, not just enjoyable on a surface level, but addressing some interesting and deeper philosophical things. So I want to bring those up and see where they think the saga stands right now. And yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks for watching. Here's myself with Nathan Montgomery and Brandon Tejedor. I'm very excited to have Brandon and Nathan here, two fellow Star Wars fans and aficionados, if I dare say, and two guys that I've gotten to know through some philosophy and apologetics classes over the years. Nathan, you can see on the screen. Brandon, we have in a box under the table here, so you can't see him. No, he's just here on audio. So, but
I'm
guys,
representing the dark side tonight.
yes, you are the dark side. That's good. I like it.
There you go.
Guys, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Why don't you guys just kind of introduce yourselves and why you're into Star Wars and how that ties into other interests you have. So, Brandon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Brandon Tejedor. As for how I came to fall in love with Star Wars, I think my story is pretty similar to most people's in that I was introduced to it by my family when I was a kid. I was shown the original trilogy and introduced to the magic of it. I definitely took that a bit further in that by the time I was around 9 years old, I remember in fourth grade, I was already reading the like 400, 500 page like adult novels in the Star Wars universe. So I definitely jumped in pretty heavy once I fell in love with Star Wars. So I've always been a fan of sci-fi fantasy. I've read it like in those two genres for fun, probably more than anything else. I've always been into those kinds of movies and shows. I'm one of the kids that read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit before the films came out. I was like 12, 13, I think, when I read them. But yeah, I've also had a love for kind of deep thought, philosophy, theology, critical thinking, which is more of the direction that my academic studies have taken me. So I have an undergrad in church ministries with a pre-seminary minor. And then I did my master's degree in philosophical apologetics, Christian apologetics, and definitely enjoyed that. And in recent years, especially, I'd say for a long time, I operated under this. My nerd culture was kind of one sphere of my life, and my grown-up life, my ministry, my theology, philosophy, that was another area. And in recent years, I got a little tired of that kind of split and divide. And so I've really been trying to bring the two together, working on, creative projects, getting more involved in kind of geek and nerd culture directly, occasionally doing speaking events on various topics related to pop culture as well as contemporary ethical issues and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of my basic intro into why I love these things, I guess.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. And Nathan.
So I'm Nathan Montgomery. I'm currently a PhD student in philosophy of religion. My entrance into Star Wars, very young. I have a memory of my dad showing me Star Wars for the first time. I was probably 4 or 5 when I saw New Hope for the first time, and he tries to deny it, but I remember him being giddy like a little schoolboy that he was showing his son Star Wars for the first time. So yeah, I mean, from 5 years old, I fell in love with Star Wars. I can't tell you how many times I watched the VHS copies of the original Star Wars films. So I remember the days when Han shot first and all that. So I remember that era. And then I remember I had an uncle who was really into it too. So he introduced me, I think, some of the books and some of that stuff. So I read some of the books, and then when they we're re-showing the originals in theaters. I mean, Dad went and took my brother and me like opening day to all those, and so yeah, Star Wars has been a love of mine for years. I mean, Empire Strikes Back is still my favorite film of all time. Not saying it's the best, but it's near perfect. But it's one of my favorite films. So yeah, I mean, also Brandon's story sounds a lot like mine. Big into geek culture, fantasy, sci-fi, all that. I also read, Lord of the Rings before they were ever movies. All that stuff. Read a whole lot of the extended canon of Star Wars. Though probably not as much as Brandon's read. Yeah, I just love Star Wars. And then always been interested to talk about that kind of stuff. And then in college, when I had a lot, meeting a lot of people and stuff, I found film and art and books and that as a great way of just talking to people and then connecting. And actually was a major part of my like gospel conversations I was having with friends was over movies and ideas and all that. And I think there's lots of films that have that, but Star Wars has lots of fun ideas to talk about, so anyway, yeah, looking forward to talk.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, everyone likes Star
Sorry,
Wars.
turn my phone's on. Turn that off. Star Wars is going.
Yeah, well,
I
Star
mean,
Wars.
it's R2 sounds, so it's not.
Yeah, it's R2D2. That's my ringtone. So
That's
true nerd right here.
Yeah. I'll just real quick. I'll say my parents saw Star Wars 2 or 3 days before I was born, and I think that had a large part of me wanting to get out in the world. Like, ooh, what's that? I want to see that. And one of my very first memories is seeing The Empire Strikes Back in the theater. I was 3 years old, and seeing Luke get his hand cut off scared the poo-poo out of me.
I think that's the proper response to that.
Yeah, especially at 3. But and then I was in college when they were re-released. But I, same VHS had them for years and all. But anyway, so well, thanks again for being here. Thanks for that little intro. The new sequel trilogy is done with Rise of Skywalker, and I got to be honest, I was skeptical when I heard they were going to make 3 more movies, and now that they're all done, I feel like why is my yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think? We can talk about Rise of Skywalker specifically, and it just felt unsatisfactory, big picture for this whole new trilogy. And what do you think? What do you guys? You want to go first, Brandon, since you can't see us?
Sure, I don't mind jumping in.
Yeah.
So I was actually thrilled when I heard the announcement. Actually, when Disney picked up the rights to it, because I knew George Lucas was just sitting on it. We were seeing a lot of EU, we were seeing a lot of games. We just weren't seeing movies come from him, and no doubt, kind of toxic response to the prequels and underwhelming critical response and stuff had something to do with that. But the idea, because the MCU was really picking up steam at the time of the Lucas acquisition, and the idea that Star Wars might get that kind of grand treatment was something I had been looking forward to for years. Like, because I had been kind of immersed in the depth of the Star Wars lore for a long time, and I knew there was so much potential there to tap. And so, yeah, I was the opposite of you. I wasn't skeptical. I was full steam ahead. And I'll be honest, 7 and 8 worked really well for me. Like, I know 7 was a little bit of a copy paste of A New Hope, but it was like it was like A New Hope remastered in a way. Like, this is A New Hope. It's prettier. It's got a great new cast that I think relates a little more to modern audiences, while still having a lot of the old in there. And like, it was props to J.J. Abrams. Like, I think he did a really good job launching the sequel trilogy. There was enough new, enough old to where overall fan response was good, critic response was good. It was a huge financial success. Like, I can't really fault The Force Awakens too much. And I'm one of those people who I thought The Last Jedi offered a lot of depth. I thought it offered a lot of actually really honest takes on the characters. We look at the character of Luke Skywalker, his handling in the movie is very, very controversial. And personally, I think Rian Johnson did a much better job presenting sort of the real Luke Skywalker in that movie, rather than there's like the myth of Luke within the Star Wars universe, but there's also the myth of Luke Skywalker in pop culture at large, like in the real world, the way we talk about Luke Skywalker. And there's a lot of things about the real world myth of Luke in particular that I feel has been um, very, very poorly handled. Like we view him as this just always choosing the right thing sort of character. And personally, I actually enjoy Return of the Jedi more than Empire Strikes Back. And one reason it's because, like the big reason, I'm not saying everything about the movie is better, but what I love about it is that Luke's struggle with light and dark is so real in that movie. He
True.
starts off dressed in black. He uses Force Choke, which is Darth Vader's signature move at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
He threatens Jabba with a kind of my way or die sort of approach, which is,
Mm-hmm.
Jedi can use Force, but he was definitely taking a firm route.
Yeah.
And it goes up to
Excellent, too.
this final test, facing off with Vader, his father, and with a lightsaber. The only reason he beats Vader is because he gives in to his anger and his fear and all the taunting, and he draws on the dark side and disarms Vader quite literally. And his temptation at that point is he can continue down that path and he can take Vader's place. And he knows that if he continues with the lightsaber in his hand, that's exactly what's going to happen. And where he truly becomes a Jedi for the first time is when he throws his lightsaber away and refuses to do it. And he's willing to be literally blasted to death by Force lightning than to take one more step down that road. And that's Luke. And some stuff in the EU kind of keeps that alive, but a lot of times he just turns into like kind of the do-gooder Jedi hero. Like his battle with the dark side was just permanently over, and now he's helping the next generation out. And I don't know, it never really lived up to what I loved so much about Jedi, about Return of the Jedi. So Last Jedi, I don't know, that was one thing I loved about it, and the fact that you get to see that character arc come to completion. In its final moments, you see um, really the fulfillment of the Jedi Code. Like the last line of the Jedi Code is that there is no death, there is no force. There's only the Force, and we see Obi-Wan struck down, and he becomes one with the Force. We see Yoda pass away, he becomes one with the Force. Um, but in the Last Jedi, Luke doesn't actually die; he just goes straight to becoming one with the Force. And that was one of the most powerful things for me, especially as someone who, kind of really knows the Jedi Code and like what they've been about, and seen that fleshed out in novels and the Old Republic era in the films. So I love that. Rise of Skywalker was fan service. Like I can appreciate it critically a little bit more than I personally enjoyed it, but not a lot. I mean, I do consider it the weakest entry in the series. But I don't consider I'm not someone who thinks even the Phantom Menace is like a dumpster fire or anything like that. I think they're all the movies have merit. I just think it had the least bit. We talk about value. Like I haven't really been able to, even with people who love the movie, I haven't really had any deep conversations about Rise of Skywalker. It's like it's just kind of there. Um, so I don't know. I like the new sequels. I liked where they were going. I think there are a lot of things that could have made 9 better, but I still think 7 and 8 are fantastic. And I'm really excited about more Star Wars to come.
Yeah. Cool. Brandon, sorry, not Brandon, Nathan.
Rise of Skywalker.
Your name is
Okay.
right there. Yeah.
So, good question. So, a lot of things to say. I think I'm a little bit different from Brandon in that I think I can enjoyed it more than recognizing its technical merit, if you will, as a film. Uh, the more I think about it. So walking out initially of the theater, I was most like, I have thoughts, but I'm not sure what they are yet. It took me a while to sort through. So I'm kind of mixed bag on it. I think initially I was a little higher on it, and now that I've thought about more, I think I would say it's the weakest also of the new ones. I actually really like Force Awakens, even if it is a little bit just New Hope, common critique, but I don't mind that because all stories are cyclical in some ways. They're pulling from each other. And Abrams did have a hard job. I mean, both of these films. I mean, Force Awakens, you're bringing back biggest franchise ever. That's a big task. I think he did well. introducing such new, interesting characters, and like it felt like Star Wars, you know. So Force Awakens, I'm pretty high on. I also like Last Jedi. I don't think it's perfect, but I think when it hits a high, it hits higher than most things in Star Wars. But it does have some dud moments also. But I still really like it. I actually like a lot of what Brand said about Luke. Even though I like Empire better, I think the Luke stuff is great, and I like how you describe most of that. I think I would agree pretty much with a lot of that take. Um, interesting. There's so much you can talk about Star Wars, but interesting comment on that is, you know, he's told by Obi-Wan that to become a true Jedi, he'll have to kill Vader, but that's not true. Where in some ways he surpasses his own mentor. Like the moment he becomes a true Jedi is when he throws away his sword and refuses to kill Vader.
Now, not to
So
interrupt, but did Obi-Wan say he had to kill Vader or face Vader? I think
I
he said
think
he had to face him.
he does face, but I think he talks about
Well, Luke says, I can't kill my own father, and then Obi-Wan says, then the Emperor has already won.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
so yeah, I guess I'm paraphrasing, but
Fair enough.
yeah, so that's a good point though. But still this idea that like his true is not striking down, but throwing away a saber, you know, which that theme's picked up in lots of Star Wars stuff. Like if you watch Rebels, that's picked up too by Kanan. There's lots of interesting. But anyway, back to Rise. Yeah, I mean there was a lot stacked against JJ. He had a bad hand dealt him. Not, and this isn't a knock against Johnson. This is a knock against. I mean, Carrie Fisher passing away. Even though I think Last Year is a good film, there is a lot of negativity towards it by a base. There's a lot going on, and it's a little rushed. So yeah, I think there's things I really like, and there's things I really don't like, I guess, is where I'm at. And I'm not sure it ultimately is satisfying. I think that's the best way. I don't know that it concludes the full arc fully, though there are things I do really like in the midst of it. Like, and I don't think it's all fan service. Because like some of the stuff was like, you could call it fan service, but like when Rey's hearing all the Jedi speak, and then for someone who's seen all the shows and everything, like I still really like that moment and the idea behind it, even if I'm not sure about Palpatine being there and that's how this is going down. I enjoy like that idea of, yes, she's following in the footsteps of all these other Jedi come before, and if you listen to some of the quotes they say, like, I mean, Anakin even says, hey, and Christian Returning, by the way, says, balance the force as I once did. So JJ even then is acknowledging what Vader previously did for a time accomplish something, but as things go in Star Wars universe, evils come back. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm kind of mixed on it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And to be honest, that line I thought was token, like, oh, we gotta find a way to make sure Anakin, the chosen one, ties into all of this. And yeah, I wasn't sold on that personally. What any other specific thoughts you had on that, on Rise, that you want to throw out there before we get into a round table? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's a lot you can talk about with Rise too. I mean, you can talk about technical stuff about being overbloated at times. You can discuss whether Palpatine should have come back the way he came or not. But
let's do that. How did you guys feel about Palpatine? To me, it seemed like that wasn't the plan all along. And I've heard some people say, "Oh, it was," and other people say, "No, it wasn't." I don't know. What do you guys? What's your take on Palpatine?
So on Palpatine, I would say first off, I've never thought Palpatine was a good central villain as far as like character conflict goes. Even though he's he's the main Darth Lord of especially the prequels, and you get a lot more screen time with him. His role, like where he really functions in the plot for me, is he's the force that is turning Anakin. Anakin is still the center of all of that conflict to me. Definitely even more so in the originals. Like, it'd be a little too far to say that the Emperor is like a prop in the original trilogy, but to me, he doesn't serve a massive function as a character himself so much as a plot device for the conflict between Vader and Luke. So to see him come in 9, I'll be honest, the first couple minutes into 9, even though it was very rushed and we got kind of half a movie in 5 minutes.
In an opening crawl.
Yeah, right. The dead speak, you know. No, that happened really fast. But I'll be honest, the initial premise is this is not the Emperor here to like take over himself. This is the Emperor to help Kylo Ren become the ultimate villain. Like I got kind of excited about that. Like I was a little skeptical about him coming back into the movie from the trailers and stuff. But I'm like, okay, you know what? This seems to be the Emperor doing what the Emperor does best, enabling the ultimate villain, and creating conflict there. I really like that. I don't feel the movie capitalized on that idea, and I think the further we moved away from that, and the more we moved towards Palpatine trying to become the central villain himself, I think the more it lost me. So like, I know it was mostly towards the end, but when we're at the point where he's trying to get Rey to become sort of the new heiress of the Empire, not too bad there. At that point, it was just so obvious she wasn't going to do that to me that I wasn't completely sold on it. But like, if that had been kind of the main plot earlier,
In the trailer.
what's up?
But she had that red lightsaber in the
Oh, that was trailer bait. That was I knew that was going to be trailer bait. I would have liked that to have been something more developed, but yeah, the what 60-second scene that
Yeah.
ended up being that's more than I expected.
I
From
mean,
it.
I'll say from the trailer, I called it to my friends that, oh, that's her just her vision, like Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker in the cave vision.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah, exactly. So it showed like hints of promising ideas, but it never really leaned into them. Like they were,
Yeah.
and I mean, Palpatine's plot changes like 5 times throughout the movie, and 3 of those are like in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I just Palpatine as an enabler of a great villain, good. I think J.J. Abrams could have made that work. Palpatine as the central villain using sky beam power, lightning, and ending the war in like a, you know, just a beam battle that we see in like Harry Potter, Dragon Ball Z, that kind of stuff. I was pretty disappointed with that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people liked Kylo Ren's redemption. Honestly, I think the movies would have been a lot better off if he had kind of become the villain that Vader wasn't, the one who rejected redemption. And I think the weight of that could have perhaps done something a lot more powerful in the end of Rise of Skywalker. Um, it left me feeling like I can't say I hate the movie in the sense I have this like vitriolic reaction to it, but it definitely was not a movie I felt a lot of attachment to. And these were characters that I was completely absorbed in 7 and 8. And like by the time I mean halfway through 9, I don't really even care that much what happens to Ben Solo or Poe Dameron, Finn. Like I don't feel any attachment to him. Like it was a no stakes movie where everything was just going to work out okay or not matter and that was my biggest disappointment. But there were so many signs of life, and I still appreciate that J.J. Abrams, I think, really had a vision of what he wanted to do. I don't think he was on the damage control in his mind that everyone else thought he was on.
Yeah.
I thought he was going for his vision, and I applaud him for that. And maybe if he had control of all 3 movies, it would have been more cohesive and come off stronger. I don't know. So I actually applaud Abrams for sticking to his creative vision. I don't think that the tools he relied on, that I don't think he used them in the best way, but I think they could have worked if they had been done a little differently.
Okay. Now,
Mhm.
would you guys say that it seemed like there was not an overall plan for all 3 or that did JJ just have, here's my idea, here's where I'd like it to go, and then Ryan Johnson says, well, I'm going to do this instead. I remember hearing one person say that it seemed like 9 was trying to fight between where 7 and 8 were going. So, yeah,
See, I don't think there was a overall plan per
It's pretty much
se.
hard to confirm that there wasn't.
Yeah, but I don't I don't buy the narrative that Johnson was just ignoring like Force Awakens and doing his own thing. I do think if you actually stop and think about what he would have known when he was writing and shooting Last Jedi, he wouldn't have known some of the questions people were asking, and he tries to answer the film in a. I think he does actually answer all the questions the film asks, just not a way people wanted him to answer it. Is more where a problem is. So I don't. I think he was trying to follow through with Abrams, but I mean, Abrams did leave him kind of a, hey, here's Luke. Now what? He doesn't. Abrams has always been really good at asking questions and opening mysteries, but he's not ever been great at closing the mystery box, if you will. So
that's what I mean, though. That's what I'm wondering. Like, did he just leave off with, okay, Rey's handing the lightsaber to Luke, episode 7. That's all I got, guys. Ryan, you take it from here.
So it's not even speculation. I can confirm that's what happened. With Last Jedi in particular, I've watched every interview. I've gone through all the director's commentary. Like the making of videos. I've gone through all of that. And Rian Johnson actually talks quite a bit about how, when it came to writing The Last Jedi, some of the challenges were like he has Luke. Okay, here's what we know about Luke. This tragedy happened that he put himself into exile away from. No one can find him using the Force. He's on an island in the middle of nowhere. This war's been going on. The First Order's been rising. He's nowhere to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Why would Luke do this? And he was trying to think of a reason that still kind of treats Luke as courageous and trying to do the right thing, but also still acknowledge Luke's weaknesses that we see in the original trilogy. And he comes up with, he's self-exiled because he's learned the legacy of the Jedi. He knows that their hubris, their pride, their own legendary view of themselves has gotten in the way. And he believes the most courageous thing, and he has to fight every impulse inside of himself to do this, is to cut himself off and to stay away. And that impulse I'm talking about is like we see at the end of Empire. He's the guy that even when it brings him closer to the dark side, will rush to the aid of his friends. And now he's seen the consequences of that and is holding back. But Rian Johnson talks about how these were the kinds of challenges. And like the same thing with Rey's parentage. He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't have anything to work with. And his motivation was that in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke is told that Vader is his father, it's basically the worst, most devastating thing that Luke can hear in that moment. And so he was trying to think, what would have a similar impact on Rey? And her whole journey is finding out who she is, why she's special, and for her to find out that she's nobody special, that she just is someone who's unusually strong in the Force, which isn't unheard of. I mean, Anakin is a slave child that was conceived by midi-chlorians, but his mother was no one special.
Had to mention midichlorians.
But there was no legacy of the Skywalker family. And generally, the Force does not operate in legacies. If you look at the rest of, but there's no bloodline of Kenobi Jedi. There's no bloodline of Windu Jedi. Generally, generally Jedi are not even having children. They're discouraged from it. So, the fact that you have Anakin to his children and grandchildren being strong in the Force is a real major anomaly. The fact that Rey is a nobody that's strong in the Force is actually pretty consistent with Star Wars lore. But it was also the most devastating news for her at the time. But he talks about these processes, and it makes it very clear that Abrams kind of, here's like some questions, here's where the characters are, here's where the pieces lay. He was picking up those pieces and trying to make the most sense of them in the most consistent way possible. And I think Abrams was also trying to do that with The Rise of Skywalker.
I agree.
Also, I think he had some ideas when he was making Force Awakens, like, okay, this would be cool. Here's some ideas that, I would like this to go in. But of course, he thought there'd be 2 different directors following him because 9 was originally supposed to be handled by someone else. And when he got the chance to do 9, he was probably thinking, hey, some of those ideas I had before, I think I can still do them. And according to interviews, at least, he thinks that Johnson's film actually strengthened them. So he leans really heavy into the forced connection between Kylo and Rey and how they have an almost physical presence with one another, even when they're just like, he takes that to 11 in his movie. So there's definite things he draws on from Johnson. So I think they both had the same mentality, but it's definitely confirmed that there was no overarching script,
Yeah.
not even for the major plot beats, like who Rey's parents are, or who Snoke is, or who even the main villain is. Like there was no
Yeah.
Kylo Ren is the main villain, or Palpatine's behind it all from the beginning.
And I think that is the difference between the new ones and definitely the originals, and for better or worse, the prequels too. Like, they obviously didn't have a map out of like exactly how to get from point A to point C, or even know fully where they were going in the original trilogy. Like, if you listen to Lucas and them as they're trying to figure out things, like the script changed a lot, but because Lucas had that vision and he was very involved in all of it, there still was a, I don't know, a consistency of the trajectory that I think is lacking in the new ones. As much as I think I'll still say this, all three of the newest ones individually are better than any of the prequels that Lucas was involved in.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
But in some ways, the prequels stand out as a more full, complete story that in some ways is, I think, very interesting, even if the execution of that story was not to my personal enjoyment always. So,
Mhm.
so
I heard
yeah,
someone say that the sequels, the whole is weaker than the sum of its parts, and I thought that was
yes,
a really good way to put it. But that just blows my mind that they didn't have a big, arc of, all right, here's where we're going. I mean, unless it was like an artistic experiment of, ooh, let's have one movie and then see where the next person takes it, and then see where the next person takes it. I mean, that would be an interesting artistic approach, but I don't know if that with Star Wars is the best place to try it.
yeah. Now, if you're trying to tell a trilogy, which invokes this idea of a complete these three together are
Yeah,
one story. I mean, you can do it with television some, but you need people like overseeing who are like really checking, is this matching up? Is this lining up? Is this following somewhere?
yeah. And the fact that it's also supposed to cap off 9 movies, not just
Hmm.
3. So I'm looking at all 9 movies now, like,
Hmm.
well, okay, so is this about who's this really about now?
Hmm.
Is it about Palpatine? Is this Luke?
I joked to my uncle, who's big, it's like it really should be called a Palpatine saga, not the Skywalker saga. So
I mean,
Go
I
ahead.
think it would have stayed the Skywalker saga if
yeah,
Kylo Ren had remained the principal villain of Episode 9. And see, I'm
yeah.
going to disagree. I still think this experiment could have worked if Part 9 had not tried to kind of redefine the conflict we had seen so far. Because even in 7, like Snoke is introduced, but Snoke is not the principal villain of 7.
Hmm.
Even if he had stayed alive in 8, he's still not the principal villain. The main villain of 7 and 8 is Kylo Ren, in the same way that Vader is the chief villain of 4 through 6. And I think that Abrams put too much into the plot in 9. Like, here's the thing about the structure of a trilogy is one, like in any trilogy, part 1 and part 2, they're all about establishing kind of the world, the conflict, the nature of things. In the third act, that's not really the time to introduce the new factions, or nothing that's been hasn't been kind of established already.
Hmm.
And we see things kind of cut from whole cloth added into 9 all of a sudden. um,
Yeah, no,
and
that's true.
so if some of these devices like Palpatine, who I'm calling a device, not a character, again, have been brought in to help escalate the central plot pieces that were already in play, that Abrams himself started in 7.
Mm.
Like, Johnson does not introduce a lot of new characters or a lot of new conflict. He focuses very much on what's introduced in 7. If Abrams had continued that, I think it would have been a much more cohesive trilogy.
I think that's fair. And back to like the whole talking about Palpatine, I was fine with a form of Palpatine being involved. Um, I like the idea of him as like a Force ghost or a holocron or something that he's helping drive Kylo towards a deeper dark side or something like that. Like, so I wasn't like even when I heard his voice in the first trailer, like, which is only one I watched before a film. It's like I was pretty okay with him coming back in some form because I actually think Palpatine's a really interesting character. I really like Palpatine as a character, especially from the extended universe stuff. But yeah, it's more the way it's executed. So I think, Brandon, you're right. There's too much plot.
Yeah. It's a
in
movie that
Rise
would
of
have been
Skywalker.
better for having less.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. Like, it needed time to breathe. Like, you had no time to catch your breath, which sometimes you're like, if you had time to breathe, you'd be like, wait, that made no sense. How does the dagger work? I'm still.
Like the Goonies, look.
Because the water doesn't move anything ever,
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I think they could have cut out the whole MacGuffin if Palpatine is announcing himself to the entire galaxy anyway, and
Yeah.
he's got the greatest naval fleet that the galaxy's ever seen. I don't see why he couldn't just be like, here's where I am, come at me. Like honestly, I think they could have cut out the MacGuffin plot entirely, and I don't think
I
it would
think
have
so.
lost anything.
I think you kind of cut out like the whole first third of the film.
And
for
I didn't even
most
mind
part.
the MacGuffin.
Yeah.
It was okay. Like I was probably enjoying the movie more during those phases. But I'm just saying, like, they could have focused a lot more time on this is the conflict between Rey and Kylo. The
Mhm.
Emperor is driving this conflict. And like here's another way you could have gone. If you want Kylo redeemed, have Kylo returning to the light as Rey is falling to the dark. Like have it where the roles are kind of reversing and suddenly you have a flipped script where like Rey is starting to embrace the dark side at the end and Ben is trying to bring her back to the light.
Yeah.
And Palpatine is like the master behind all of this. He's just, cackling in the background on his throne like he did in Jedi.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not saying they should have done that, but
Yeah.
it
No,
would have
been
kept the
interesting.
conflict focused on the two characters that it should be about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where does that before they made these three, and why I was skeptical about when I first heard they were going to make 3 more movies was 1 through 6, for better or for worse with the prequels. 1 through 6 makes a really beautiful story arc for Anakin Skywalker.
Mhm.
I agree.
And I was afraid that was going to be ruined by 3 new movies. Because George Lucas had said, I've heard him say on a couple occasions that Star Wars is about the fall and redemption of Anakin Skywalker. Like that's, or at least that's where he got to eventually.
Mhm.
So I was afraid, like, ooh, what's this going to do to the Anakin redemption arc? And now that Palpatine's not dead,
Mhm.
the dark side is a pathway to many abilities, blah, 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 blah. So is he dead for sure now? That's one question I had. Why can't he come back again? But also, like, it seemed like, well, okay, Anakin's sacrifice and Anakin's balance, Anakin killing one Sith and then dying as the other Sith, the rule of 2 thing there. It just seemed like all of that was like, nah, that's not really the thing anymore. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too sentimental about it.
So what is, let me ask you this. What does balancing the Force mean to you, Chris?
Well, I assumed in 1 through 6 it was the dark side had grown too strong, and that Anakin was supposed to be the one to restore it back to the light and dark being the same again, which is kind of what the Jedi were supposed to be doing, I guess. But
I mean, in 1 through 3, is it really the dark side that's too strong? I mean, you've got 2 to 3 Sith active and alive at any given point, and you've got the entire Jedi Order.
Right, but like Luke says in Episode 8, which is one of my favorite moments in all of the movies, where he says that it talks about the Jedi hubris and that Darth Sidious was able to consolidate power and become the Emperor right under their noses.
Mhm.
And in Episode, I think it's in 2, Yoda says the dark side clouds everything.
Yeah, they say it repeatedly.
Yeah.
So I do think that the dark side slowly was getting more and more powerful to the point where the Jedi were weakened because of it, because they were, like Luke said, so consumed in their own hubris that Anakin was supposed to be the one to bring it back.
Yeah.
So I think in 1 through 3, Anakin fulfilled the prophecy by striking down the light side. I think the light side was too strong, and I think by helping the dark rise, he balanced it. In 4 through 6, it's clearly the opposite. What last few Jedi they are, I mean, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Luke, at least in the context of the films, now we have, maybe like Ahsoka Tano and stuff, a couple others running around. But, you know, in general, the dark was absolutely overpowering the light in 4 through 6.
Mhm.
And I think, and here's one of those things I love about Jedi, and I never quite liked how Luke got handled after Jedi in a lot of the EU, is that Anakin balanced it again. Like, he, in a way, kind of turned back to the light, tipping things a bit, but he also cast down the Emperor at the same time. And Luke here was a Jedi that, in many ways, had balanced the light and dark in himself. Unless you think that him giving into the dark side impulses to go save his friends in Cloud City was wrong, or unless you think that he should have been struck down by Vader in the lightsaber duel in Jedi, you have to acknowledge that in some way him giving into the dark at certain moments was the right thing to do. But then there were times where obviously following the light path was the right thing to do. And so I think that Anakin's final moments are when he kind of balanced it again, and Luke was, in a sense, the maintainer of that balance. Um, so I think that Anakin balanced the Force both ways in a way that ended with Luke. Where I kind of hope these sequels might go is Rey forging a new path, and frankly, we have no idea what Rey is going to be doing now. But you have this whole thing of she's now kind of seen the worst of the Jedi, but she's also chosen to take the tomes and learn from the master. And even Luke's teaching to her in 9 is kind of a learn from the past rather than kill the past mentality. And that suggests don't repeat the past, don't ignore the past, but do something new. And even originally, if you go 25,000 years prior to the saga, when the original Jedi were being established, there wasn't light and dark sides. That was a kind of split, a civil war that happened later as some began to favor stoic reason over the passions. But the Force imbalance is a mix of the two, I think.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, that's interesting, Brandon, which I think this highlights, as much as I love Star Wars, there's obviously, I think, from a Christian standpoint, major problems with its philosophical background.
it's not a Christian metaphysic.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And specifically the idea of like balance, I think it shows why we inherently know that can't be right, because we don't long for a balance of light and dark or good and evil. Why we love Return of Jedi so much is there's an end to evil, right? It's not.
Let me interject right there. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like even in Empire, is Luke is giving into the dark side by going to try and rescue his friends in Cloud City. But is that evil?
I don't think he's given into the dark side there myself.
But hold on. You're assuming dark side is evil. Like Yoda, I think, knows the dark side. And he's saying, like, he thinks Luke is lost to the dark side over it. And I mean, the whole thing is, love leads to loss and suffering, which leads to hate, which leads to the dark side. Like, that's kind of the Jedi teaching. But the idea is that the dark side is passion, not necessarily evil. And if you're familiar with the Old Republic era, it explores that a lot more. Like, there's Jedi who dispassionately condemn entire worlds, and there's Sith who, with their passions aflame, will fight for, the little guy. And
okay, so a couple things with that. I mean, maybe in the Star Wars universe that's what they say, but they're still treated as dark is evil, light is good. I mean, that's how the story's presented. Now, obviously, I think this gets to the bigger problem of like Buddhism, for example, in general, is this idea of passion is what's wrong. And I mean, so obviously Lucas is drawing heavily from Buddhist and Taoist thought when he's developing the Jedi mythos. But as he writes the story, he writes it as dark side is evil, light side is good. And I think what people are gravitating to is that good overcomes evil. And that's why Anakin's redemption is so moving in the end, is he realized his son's self-sacrificing love for him moves him back from the way of evil to good. And I think that's what we are drawn to actually as story lovers, and like how the world really is in light of the truth of Christianity. Now, I think you're all right, Brandon, in how Star Wars views itself in its consistent world. I just think us as an outside viewer who actually love these stories, I think what draws us is not this. I know it's generic, but I think most people, it's this light overcoming darkness, goodness overcoming evil. The original Star Wars movies doesn't end with a balance; it ends with triumph of good. This is Tolkien's sudden turn to joy, the eucatastrophe, this idea of the happy ending. This is what I think Star Wars ultimately is a fantasy in the way Tolkien talks about. I think thinking it from a Christian worldview, I think that's what we're really drawn towards. So I love Star Wars, but there are definitely inconsistencies
Yeah,
with
but
its
like
own
even in the
philosophy.
context of the originals, I think Lucas very deliberately is subverting the idea that light and dark is always good and evil in his world. I think he does it in Empire. I think he does it in Return of the Jedi, and I think he does it a lot in the prequels. Like Mace Windu wanting to completely bypass justice and everything to capture Palpatine and just wants to kill him on the spot. Like that is he's still acting like in kind of the light side. I mean, there's no indicator he's drawing on the dark side at that moment, but it's arguably an immoral decision, an evil decision, and it's one that pushes Anakin to the dark side. Like Anakin is driven like mad by the fact that he loves a woman, and he also loved his mother, and the Jedi stand in the way of that love.
Oh no, I
Like,
agree with that, but I think that's just inconsistency of why you can't live a Jedi philosophy.
well,
You'd go crazy.
I think the Jedi philosophy is evil. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I
No, I agree,
Yeah,
but I
but
also yeah.
like
if 7, 8, and 9 had gone that direction, Brandon,
Mhm.
that to me would have been fascinating. Because
Old Republic era does all the time, which I'm excited we're going to get an Old Republic movie finally.
okay, because that would be interesting to me. Light and dark are balanced in Luke, like you say, and then when we first see him in Force Awakens, he's wearing a gray robe, not black, not white, not brown like the regular Jedi. So I wondered if, is there going to be a new force wielding order that does have a balance of light and dark?
I would have loved the idea of the Gray Jedi, which is mentioned in other places. The idea of that
Which I don't
this
know
more balanced. No, but it's the idea is that they're more balanced, and you do get some hints that Rey's moving that way with her lightsaber color choice at the end.
I like
so I think
yellow is traditionally the saber of the Jedi Sentinels. It's the traditional Jedi Order color.
The idea, but still, the idea of the more balanced. Even within the Jedi, there's some balanced ideas with, I think, yellow, if I remember right. In what story is it? It'll come to me in a little bit. But yeah, it's obviously still traditionally Jedi, but there's stuff interesting there. Like I was hoping Rise of Skywalker personally meant a new order that's just called the Skywalkers. That wasn't just realizing both the Sith and Jedi and not good. Yeah. But that's more just story. There's so much other stuff you can talk about with Star Wars other than just even that. There's so much
we haven't even gotten to John Williams yet.
Oh gosh, no we haven't. So much we can talk about with Star Wars. But
so do you guys think Star Wars is changed for the worse now with these new movies, or I don't know, what do you think? Because I feel like, well, these last 3, they kind of sucked the joy out of why I loved the first 6 so much.
I don't feel that way at all. Like I'm genuinely excited about it. Like I'm more excited about what's coming next because I really expected this trilogy to be moving us like this is our first steps beyond the Skywalker saga, not just the capstone of it, if you will. And they didn't again, 9 especially kind of brought it right back full circle. So it never broke away. But that's it. Like they're saying, we're done with the Skywalker saga. There's no 10 through 12 that are the Skywalker saga. Like we're talking Old Republic era now. We're talking about maybe more spin-off movies. I'm really excited that Star Wars now is free from the shackles of the past narrative arcs and now can go anywhere. Like the entire breadth of the lore is open to us, and I can't wait to dive in.
See, I think I agree with that, but I was hoping 7 was going to be like a passing of the baton more. Like just, yeah, they've, Luke, Han, and Leia, they've completed their great mission, right? And now they're passing on the torch to the next generation, and not as much, we're going to continue their story, which I think is what Brandon's saying. So I'm actually also very excited about the other places they can go with Star Wars. There's things, if you don't think about just the Skywalker films, but if you think about, I mean, I loved Rogue One, and which I shouldn't have because I know exactly how it ends, um, in some ways. I
You
mean,
cared about those characters too.
yeah,
Than,
I
anyway.
think Solo, if you hadn't called it Solo, if it had just been a smuggler movie, I think would have been received a lot better. I actually like a lot of that film, though it also has cringeworthy moments. Mandalorian is wonderful, and I'm so excited for more stuff like that, and like the Obi-Wan series. I mean, so there's a lot of things I love about Star Wars that there's a lot of ways to go, especially like Brandon alluded, like Old Republic stuff. Where they've done best, I think, is where they've pulled from the EU stuff, even if they've adapted and gone very different. There's so much interesting things in the EU to pull from in some way that I'm genuinely excited to see where they go. Even if I don't love all the films of the new ones, that there's still a lot of interesting things in them too. So like they're a mixed bag. Kind of like the prequels, actually. I love things in the prequels, even if those are objectively not great films in a lot of ways.
In many ways,
Yeah. But we did get Duel of Fates. John Williams.
There you go.
There we go.
John Williams has never disappointed anyone, I don't think.
That is true.
Well, that makes me feel better, guys, that you're not worried or negative or down or think that the whole thing is in trouble now. That makes me feel better. But
I think the best really could be ahead. That's my opinion.
I think that's possible, yes, too.
well, that cheers me up.
Good. Mission accomplished for today.
Are we all fans of The Mandalorian then, Brandon? Are you?
I have not watched the conclusion because I've been trying to watch with my wife, and she's been busy. She's been at conferences and stuff, so I'm very excited about that. So my evaluation of 1 through 6 is that it was I wasn't sure if it was keeping its cards too close to its chest or if it was deciding this is going to be kind of Star Wars light, just light, fluffy kind of Star Wars episodes with, a meme generator next to the Mandalorian. So I wasn't sure, but it sounds like it sounds like
awesome.
7 and 8 are revealing that this is a show that has a big story alongside its kind of short adventures. And I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I think for Star Wars television, that's a really good area to explore. And I'd be okay if Mandalorian leans more episodic and maybe Kenobi tells us the bigger plot. Like it's not like Mandalorian's the only card. I like the idea of having enough Star Wars out there to where there's kind of something for everyone. If you want kind of the just want to keep capturing the vibe of the originals and keep that kind of space western fantasy vibe going, we should have that. And if you want something that really like dives deep into characters and subverts expectations like fans of Last Jedi got from Johnson's film, let's have that. If you want kind of Star Wars meets Star Trek and Trade Federation versus the Republic of the prequels, let's maybe cast it a little better, but let's keep that going too. That's one of the things that's great about Disney having it is, we may hit a point where like we have a lot of very different kinds of Star Wars that aren't dependent on each other for their own narrative weight and success that could be really good for a massive fan base.
Which is why us who've been with them for a long time, Brandon, like the books, which we've all talked about, like that was a part of things I think reason we liked them so much is because there were so many different types of stories or
Oh yeah, I mean, I hate some of
worlds.
the books, and
Oh
there's
yeah,
some I love. Yeah,
some of them are terrible,
I
but
mean, there's
like,
ones that are loved. Like, I never got into the Thrawn trilogy. I'm gonna be
oh
honest.
man, I love the Throng
I know it's,
trilogy.
and I'm not calling it bad.
Yeah,
It didn't do
it
anything
didn't
for
grab.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
so like, but that's cool that people had the
yeah,
Thrawn trilogy. You know, so there you go. Like,
yeah,
I'm glad that, yeah, we're gonna
yeah.
see more film and media that's kind of like what the EU has been for a while, where there's Star Wars for everybody.
And I think television's where maybe Star Wars can actually thrive in the future in a lot of ways if they maintain what they're doing, where you can have a lot of these more different, short, interesting stories, um, and yeah. So I'm really curious to see where they go. Um, and yes, I love Mandalorian very much.
Did I hear Ryan Johnson has a trilogy he's going to be working on?
So he's still currently in talks with Lucasfilms
Yeah,
about doing Star Wars films. They're currently not planning on the trilogy model anymore. Like, there may be stories that are 3 movies long, but they're not going to plan for trilogies anymore.
yeah.
So they could have one that's 5 movies long. It's just that they're going to let the narrative determine the length at this point,
Which
rather
I
than,
think is a good.
yeah. I mean, if you can tell a Harry Potter length epic Star Wars film that's 7, 8 movies, go for it. If you know 2 movies knocks this story out, don't force a third.
Yeah.
But Ryan Johnson's still in talks right now. Lucasfilms is kind of in that, just what are we doing next? Like, they're
Mhm.
teasing out Old Republic. They're teasing out the lead director, not John Favreau, but maybe not director, but one of the other top people in Mandalorian.
Taika Waititi is in
Yes,
talks to do another Star Wars film,
yes,
and Feige's in talks to either produce one or
at
Marvel?
least maybe start overseeing
yeah, yeah,
Star Wars
at
universe.
least one Star Wars film. He's like going to be very hands on. It sounds like because he loves Star Wars as much, if not more, than actually Marvel. So
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
one thing I need to just personally accept is that Star Wars is not just the movies about Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. It's a universe. All these other things are going to be having characters and all that. So I think that's something I need to just accept and embrace.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest. I went into Rogue One and like, what is this? Is Star Wars? There's no Skywalker.
So you ended up with Skywalker in it. You just didn't know you're going to get it.
I mean,
the more I watch it, the more I like it, and the
Yeah.
more I think like, okay, it's in that universe, and that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a lot of growth to do. I admit.
Don't we all?
it's a big world out there. If you need a place to start with Knights of the Old Republic. That's probably the most widely praised piece of Star Wars media produced outside the original trilogy. It's a bit dated at this point, but it's one of the top Star Wars pieces of media you can consume.
I would love a version of Revan's story. I'm just going to say that.
Yep, there's rumors the Old Republic one might be the film telling of the story of Revan. So we'll see.
That would be cool.
As long as it sticks to Knights of the Old Republic version, because Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMORPG, really went a little out there with Revan's plot. So I don't really care about that so much.
Yeah, I didn't ever get involved in that one just because I don't do MMOs, but
yeah, I was an editorial contributor for the leading fan site at the time of launch. It's actually was a
very
paid
cool.
position for me for about a year. So
nice.
yeah, I was very invested in that for a time.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
I haven't read any expanded universe books. Well, I take that back. I did read years ago the first Zahn book, Heir to the Empire.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
It's the only like expanded universe thing I've ever read.
Yeah. I will say I'm not caught up with all the new stuff they've done with the new canon, but like the Vader comic book run is quite great, and because I have read that, and it's actually really interesting. So,
Cool.
There is some interesting new stuff being written too. Yeah.
Well, do you guys have any last thoughts you want to share about Star Wars? It seems like a good place we can wrap it up. But you've made me feel better because I Rise of Skywalker. I've only seen it once, and I haven't had that urge to go see it again, which was so unlike me. I saw Force Awakens 5 times. I think I saw Last Jedi 3 times in the theater.
Yeah.
And this one, I was just like, I don't know. And
Yeah.
but, yeah,
I'm
maybe.
pretty sure I saw all the prequels 2 or 3 times at least, and I definitely saw 7 and 8 several times. So yeah, Tross is the only one that's had a theatrical release in my lifetime that I've only watched once.
Oh, you
And I
too. Okay.
and well, I actually got to see the originals in theaters when they did those like 1 month long releases in the late '90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I only saw those once each in theater. But that wasn't a new release.
I had to be
Yeah.
taken to those so I saw those once in theaters. But yeah.
But kind of at my closing points. So I've done presentations on kind of religious themes and Star Wars and Faith of the Jedi and stuff. And here's what I would advise anyone that really wants to look at this, I think, through a kind of proper lens. If you're looking kind of the Christian view of Star Wars, if you will, I think it's still really important to understand that sort of the mythos, the nature of the Force, you really have to look at that to understand it through an Eastern lens. You can't use traditional light dark Western metaphors to fully grasp what's going on there, or even what Lucas is doing with it in the films. He's drawing on Eastern, basically yin yang theory, which again, Westerners think yin and yang is the balance of good and evil. It's not. It's the balance of opposing forces, which can be like logic and passion. It can be, a sense of duty with towards one's nation, towards a sense of love for one's family, or self-interest versus the interest of the many. Like yin and yang is about any kind of opposing forces. It gets presented with a good and evil theme, but that's not all it is to it. But the Christian aspect, I think, is that he definitely draws on Western religion for character and plot arcs. So look for Christian or Judeo-Christian or Western religion monotheistic plot arcs with the characters, but understand that these are plot arcs operating in sort of an Eastern metaphysic. And I think that'll help you kind of not get caught up in interpretations that can backfire on you. If you associate the Jedi with the church, for instance, and
not these days.
Yeah. And your response to Last Jedi was, "Oh, he thought he was burning the Jedi text. That's a metaphor for the destruction of Western Christianity." Which some people did. That was a
yeah.
like no,
so dumb when I remember that. Yeah,
like noteworthy Christian apologists were taking that interpretation.
Yeah.
And it's you're chaining yourself to a lot of philosophical baggage when you do that I don't think they want. But when you look at the character art, like absolutely Anakin is something of a inversed Messiah figure, but he's definitely a redemption arc, whereas Luke is a more traditional Messiah figure in a lot of ways, with the last temptation and everything. You can see those parallels. They're not one-to-one. Like if you try and say everything Luke does is equivalent to Jesus, you're going to have trouble. But again, basic character themes, plot arcs, redemption arcs, turmoil within the soul, existential crises. Like there's a lot there that I think is very fruitful for the Christian mind.
I like all of what you just said, Brandon. That was really good and really helpful in lots of ways. The only things I think I would add, thinking again just about Rise of Skywalker, I do think you do have this theme of, I don't know how well it's executed always, but that no one's beyond redemption or change.
I mean, the Emperor seems to be.
Well, yeah, but I mean, overall, Finn was a stormtrooper, but he changed. A whole host of other stormtroopers supposedly changed. Poe was a spice runner, and he's changed and has a real cause he fights for now. Ben changes back to the good. I mean, so you get this. Rey is tempted, but she holds on, and actually chooses good over evil in the end by choosing Skywalker over Palpatine for her name. You know, so, and I think this gets back to what Brandon was talking about, like in the character, and there seems to be running through a lot of Star Wars this idea of redemption. I think that we recognize also this idea of true heroism is this idea of sacrifice. You know, these themes do come out a lot. Also, another thing I've always appreciated about Star Wars is it recognizes, in the words of the wise Yoda, who we haven't mentioned really to this point, you know, luminous beings we are, not this crude matter. Like Star Wars has always inherently recognized that there's more to life than just this physical world we live in, you know. So I mean, those are always things I think that have drawn me. And I think all good art, all good movies, all good stories, they draw us towards transcendence, this idea of that there's something more out there. It draws us to wonder. And I love Star Wars because it drew me to wonder as a child, and it still does even now. So
Yeah, definitely.
That's cool.
yeah.
That's really cool. Well, guys, hey, thank you so much for jumping on and talking about Star Wars. And maybe we can do this again sometime with, I don't know, the next trilogy or next show or whatever. And
They've still got one slated for December 2022, I think.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having us on.